It starts with a small cut, something that should sting, something that should make you wince. But instead of acknowledging it, instead of taking care of the wound, you hear yourself utter the words that have become your reflex. It's nothing. Others have it worse. I'm fine. And in that moment, something deep happens beneath your consciousness. You have just taught yourself that your pain doesn't matter. You have just reinforced the belief that what hurts you isn't valid enough to deserve attention. This is the silent psychology of people who minimize their own suffering. They are not humble, they are not strong, they are protecting themselves from a truth they learned long ago, that their pain was once too disturbing for anyone else to bear. Let me ask you a question that might feel uncomfortable. When was the last time you allowed yourself to feel the full weight of what hurt you? When was the last time you didn't immediately compare your struggle to someone else's to decide that yours didn't count? Because here's what most people don't understand about minimization. It's not a conscious choice. It's a survival pattern that began forming years before you knew it had a name. Maybe you were 7 years old, crying over something that felt enormous to your little heart. And someone who should have carried that pain with you looked at you and said, "Stop being dramatic. You're too sensitive." Or maybe no one said anything at all. Maybe they simply looked away. Maybe they changed the subject. Maybe they felt uncomfortable with your tears and you learned something devastating, that your emotions made people uncomfortable. So you adapted. You learned to shrink your pain to a size that wouldn't bother anyone. You learned to laugh when you wanted to cry. You learned to say "I'm fine" when everything inside you was screaming that you were not okay. And now, years later, even when you're alone, even when there's no one to perform for, you still can't allow yourself to fully feel it. The pattern has become so automatic that you don't even notice you're doing it. Psychologists call this emotional invalidation, but that clinical term does not capture the silent tragedy of it. Because what you are really doing is abandoning yourself. You are doing to your own heart what was done to you once. Every time you say it's not a big deal, you tell the wounded part of you that it still doesn't matter. Every time you keep going without acknowledging what you carry, you confirm the belief that your suffering is a burden too heavy for anyone to bear, including yourself. And the cruelest part, the world often rewards this behaviour. People praise you for being so strong, so resilient, so undemanding. They don't see the cost. They don't see how you slowly disappear under the weight of a pain you won't allow yourself to name. There is a reason you do this. Understanding that reason is the first step toward freeing yourself. Because minimization is not random. It's a learned response to environments where vulnerability seemed dangerous. Children who grow up in homes where emotions are rejected learn that feelings are problems to manage, not experiences to honor. They watch the adults around them brush things off, ignore, suppress. And they internalize a devastating message. Pain is weakness, and weakness is something to hide. But sometimes it's even more subtle than that. Sometimes you grew up in a home where someone else's pain was so strong, so consuming, that there was no room left for yours. Maybe a parent was struggling, sick, depressed, or overwhelmed, and you, without anyone ever saying it explicitly, learned that your needs came second. So you became the easy child, the one who didn't complain, the one who could handle things alone. And that identity, once necessary for survival, has become the prison you still live in today. Because when you minimize your pain, you're not simply being selfless. You're reliving the moment you first learned your suffering wasn't important enough to take up space. You're still that child, waiting for permission to say it hurts. The psychology behind this goes even deeper than childhood patterns. It connects to something fundamental about how humans process pain and meaning. When you minimize your suffering, you attempt to control the narrative of your own life. If you can convince yourself it wasn't that bad, then you don't have to cry over what you lost. You don't have to feel the rage over what was done to you. You don't have to sit with the uncomfortable truth that you deserved better than what you received. Minimization becomes a shield against grief. But that shield comes at a cost. Because what you refuse to feel does not disappear. It simply goes underground, manifesting as numbness, exhaustion, a silent depression you can't quite name. Trauma psychology research confirms this. Studies show that people who constantly invalidate their own emotions experience higher rates of anxiety, depression, and chronic stress. Their body keeps score even when their mind refuses to acknowledge the pain. Your nervous system does not lie. When you tell yourself "I'm okay" while your heart races and your chest tightens, your body knows the truth. And this disconnect between what you say and what you feel creates a kind of internal fracture. You split in two. The version that performs being okay for the world and the version drowning beneath the surface. And the wider this gap grows, the harder it becomes to remember who you really are. There is something particularly devastating in the way minimizers talk about their past. They will describe events that would break most people with a casual shrug. Yeah, it happened, but whatever, I've moved on. But if you listen carefully, if you pay attention to the pauses between their words, you can hear the unresolved grief. You can feel the weight they still carry, because minimization doesn't heal wounds, it only makes them invisible. And here is what makes this pattern so hard to break. Minimization looks like strength. It looks like resilience. It gives the impression that you are mature, rational, capable of taking a step back. But true strength is not denying pain. It's having the courage to feel it fully. The strongest thing you can do is not to keep going. It's to stop, acknowledge what hurts, and say out loud, "This matters. What I went through matters. I didn't deserve this." But for many people, these words seem impossible to say. Because if you admit the depth of your pain, you must face all the years you spent pretending it wasn't there. You must confront the grief for the lost time, for relationships that failed because you couldn't let anyone see your wounds. This confrontation is terrifying. So you keep minimizing. You keep comparing yourself to people who have it worse. You keep telling yourself you should be grateful. You should be stronger. You should have gotten over it by now. But pain does not follow a schedule. And suffering is not a competition where only the worst stories deserve recognition. Your pain is valid not because it is the worst, but because it's yours. Because you felt it. Because it shaped who you have become. There is a psychological concept called comparative suffering, and it is one of the most harmful thought patterns people engage in. It is the belief that your pain only matters if it measures up to someone else's. But this logic is absurd. Would you tell someone with a broken arm that they shouldn't complain because someone else has a broken leg? Would you tell someone who lost a parent that their grief doesn't count because someone else lost both parents? Of course not. But you do this to yourself constantly. Every time you think others have it worse, you engage in a form of emotional self-harm. You take your own suffering and use it as proof of your unworthiness. You say that unless your pain is the worst pain, it doesn't deserve attention. But pain is not a hierarchy. It's not a competition. And the person who has it worse than you is probably also minimizing their own experience, comparing themselves to someone else, convinced their suffering doesn't matter either. This is how generations of people learn to suffer in silence. Each person silently convinced that their pain isn't severe enough to deserve care. Each person waiting for permission that will never come. And the tragedy is that this pattern doesn't only affect you, it affects every relationship you are in. Because when you can't acknowledge your own pain, you struggle to hold space for the pain of others as well. Minimizers often become fixers. They can't sit with discomfort, their own or someone else's, so they rush to fix, minimize, move on. They mean well. But what people often need is not solutions, it's to be witnessed. It's someone who can say, "That looks really hard," without immediately adding, "But at least is the language of minimization. At least you're healthy. At least you have a job. At least it wasn't worse." And although perspective can sometimes help, when it's used to dismiss rather than comfort, it becomes another way of saying, "Your feelings are too much for me to handle." So you've learned to handle them yourself. You've learned to be the one who needs nothing, the one who's always fine, the one who can take care of everyone because you convinced yourself you have no needs worth caring for. But needs don't disappear when you ignore them. They accumulate. They turn into resentment, burnout, a deep fatigue that no amount of rest seems to fix. Because you're not just tired of overdoing it. You're tired of pretending you're not tired. You're exhausted from carrying a pain you won't allow yourself to set down. Let's talk about what happens in the body when you chronically minimize your emotions. Because it's not just a psychological problem, it's a physiological issue. Your body responds to emotional suppression the same way it responds to a physical threat. When you suppress feelings, your nervous system registers this suppression as stress. Your cortisol levels rise, your immune system weakens. Your body remains in a low-grade activated state. waiting for a release that never comes. Studies in psychoneuroimmunology have shown that people who habitually suppress their emotions have higher rates of inflammation, cardiovascular problems, and chronic pain. Their body literally carries the pain they won't allow themselves to feel emotionally. That tension in your shoulders, that tightness in your chest, that fatigue that doesn't lift no matter how much you sleep. These are not coincidences. It's your body saying, I am still carrying what you won't acknowledge. And here's what's particularly insidious about minimization. It doesn't only affect your relationship with your own pain, it affects how you perceive reality itself. When you constantly invalidate your emotions, you begin to doubt your own perceptions. You question your instincts. You wonder if you're too sensitive. You question the validity of your feelings. And this self-doubt makes you vulnerable to people who take advantage of it. Because when you don't trust your own pain, you're more likely to accept treatment that hurts you. You're more likely to remain in situations that damage you. You're more likely to let people cross boundaries because you convinced yourself you're overreacting. Gaslighting works so effectively on minimizers because they are already gaslighting themselves. Someone tells them, it wasn't a big deal, you're dramatic. And instead of defending their reality, they agree. Because that voice sounds familiar. It's the voice they use on themselves every day. This is how minimization becomes a form of self-betrayal. Every time you reject your own feelings, you take the side of those who hurt you against yourself. You do their work for them, convincing yourself you don't deserve care. And the saddest part is, you probably learned this from people who are also minimizers, from parents who never learned to recognize their own pain, who passed on the belief that suffering in silence is noble. From a culture that celebrates productivity over presence, that tells you to push through rather than pause. We live in a world that has no patience for pain, that wants you to heal quickly, quietly, without making anyone uncomfortable. So you learn to cry in private, to struggle invisibly, to keep your wounds carefully hidden behind a smile. But what if you didn't have to do that anymore? What if you could stop abandoning yourself? What if you could learn to hold your own pain with the same compassion you extend to everyone else? This is not self-indulgence, it's survival, because you can't heal what you won't recognize. You can't release what you won't allow yourself to feel. And you can't fully love yourself if you keep telling yourself your suffering doesn't matter. The path to healing begins with one uncomfortable truth. Your pain matters, not because it's the worst pain, not because someone validated it, not because it meets an arbitrary threshold of severity. It matters because you felt it. That is enough. But believing this, truly believing it, forces you to question every message you've internalized about what makes suffering worthy of recognition. It forces you to face the grief of every time your pain was rejected, including by yourself. That grief is heavy. It's the accumulated weight of every "I'm fine" you said when you weren't fine. Every time you swallowed your tears because someone else's needs seemed more important. Every moment you stayed silent to keep the peace. And when you finally allow yourself to feel that weight, when you stop minimizing long enough to acknowledge what you've been carrying, something opens, not destructively, liberatingly. Because the truth is you've been strong for so long, too long, and strength that never rests, that never admits exhaustion, that never asks for help is not strength at all. It's survival mode disguised as resilience. True resilience includes vulnerability. It includes the ability to say, "This is hard for me." It includes the courage to drop the armor and admit your suffering, not because you're weak, but because you're human. So here's what I want you to consider. What would it look like to stop comparing your pain to others? To stop using their suffering as proof that yours doesn't count? What would it look like to simply say, "I'm struggling," without immediately qualifying it with, "but I shouldn't"? It would probably feel uncomfortable at first, strange, maybe even selfish. Because you have spent so long minimizing that honesty feels like indulgence. But that discomfort is just the unknown. It's your nervous system adapting to a new way of being. And with practice, with repetition, with the gentle insistence that your feelings deserve space, something starts to change. You begin to notice when you minimize. You catch yourself in the middle of an "I'm fine" and you pause. You ask, "Am I really fine, or is this just what I learned to say?" That pause is everything. That moment of honest self-inquiry is where healing begins, because you can't change a pattern you don't notice. But once you see it, Once you recognize the ways you've abandoned yourself, you can choose differently. You can choose to validate your own experience before anyone else does. You can choose to care for your wounds with the same care you give others. You can choose to stop waiting for permission to acknowledge that yes, what you went through hurt. Yes, it still affects you. Yes, it matters. And here's what's beautiful about that choice. When you stop minimizing your own pain, you create space for others to do the same. Your honesty gives them permission to be honest. Your vulnerability invites theirs. Because the people in your life don't need you to be fine all the time. They need you to be real. And real includes the messy, uncomfortable truth that sometimes you're not okay. Sometimes things hurt. Sometimes you need support. Admitting that doesn't make you a burden. It makes you human. And the people who truly love you, those worth keeping in your life, will be grateful for the opportunity to carry your pain as you have carried theirs. But even if no one else validates your pain, even if you are surrounded by people who still minimize it, you can validate yourself. You can be the person who finally says, what I went through was hard. I didn't deserve that. I have the right to still be affected by it. This statement is not self-pity. It's honesty with yourself. It's the beginning of breaking a pattern that kept you small, kept you silent, kept you from fully inhabiting your own life. Because when you minimize your pain, you don't just diminish your suffering, you diminish yourself. You teach yourself that your internal experience doesn't matter, that your needs are negotiable, that your presence is only acceptable when it's convenient for others. But you're not here to be convenient, you are here to be whole, and wholeness includes the parts of you that suffer, the parts that have never healed, the parts that still carry wounds from years ago. These parts don't need to be fixed or erased or minimized. They need to be acknowledged. They need to be held with compassion. They need you to stop treating them as inconveniences and start treating them as what they are, pieces of your story that deserve to be honored. So if you're someone who has spent years minimizing, who learned to smile through the pain and push through exhaustion, who convinced yourself your suffering doesn't matter, I want you to hear this clearly. Your pain is real. It is valid. It deserves to be recognized. You do not have to earn the right to feel what you feel. You do not have to justify your struggles by comparing them to someone else's. You have the right to suffer, even if someone else suffers more, and more than that, you deserve to heal. Not by pushing through, not by pretending you're fine, but by finally admitting, gently, courageously, the truth. That what you went through affected you. That you still carry wounds you never allowed yourself to heal. This is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's the beginning of treating yourself with the kindness you have always freely given to everyone else. This is what it looks like to stop abandoning yourself and start coming home. Because minimization is a form of homelessness. It is living outside your own experience, always distant from your own heart. And healing is the journey home. Back to your body, back to your feelings, back to the truth of what you survived. This journey is not easy. It requires you to feel things you have spent years avoiding. It requires you to cry losses you never allowed yourself to cry. It requires you to face the anger, the sadness, the betrayal you carefully kept hidden under a veneer of "I'm fine." But on the other side of this grief lies something you have sought your whole life. Peace. Not the fragile peace based on the performance of pretending you're okay, but the deep, rooted peace of finally being honest with yourself about what hurts. This peace does not mean that the pain disappears. It means that you are no longer at war with yourself over whether you are allowed to feel it. It means that you can hold your suffering gently instead of pushing it away. It means that you can finally rest. And maybe that's what you needed all along. Not to be stronger, not to be tougher, not to minimize more effectively, but to finally give yourself, after all these years, permission to be exactly as hurt as you are, to stop pretending, to stop playing a role, to stop abandoning yourself in the name of strength. Because the truth is that you have been strong enough, you have survived enough, you have carried enough weight for long enough, and now, if you are ready, you can lay it down. Not all at once, not perfectly, but slowly, gently, one honest moment at a time. You can start saying, "This is hard," without immediately following it with, "But I'm okay." You can start recognizing your exhaustion without justifying it. You can start treating your pain as if it mattered because it does, because you matter. And in these small, courageous moments of honesty, you will begin to remember something you forgot long ago. That you don't have to earn the right to take up space. That your feelings don't need to be justified to be valid. That you matter, not because of what you do or how much you can endure, but simply because you exist. This is the truth that minimization has kept you from seeing. That your presence, your pain, your entire complicated human experience deserves care. Not one day, not when you've suffered enough to deserve it, but now, just as you are. So stop waiting for permission. Stop comparing your wounds to others. Stop telling yourself it wasn't that bad when every part of you knows it was. And start finally gently treating yourself like someone who deserves care. Because you do. You have always deserved it. And maybe, just maybe, it's time you started believing it too. There is something deeply transformative that happens when you finally stop minimizing. It's not a sudden change, not a dramatic epiphany. It's more subtle than that. It's a slow thawing of parts of you that have been frozen for years. You begin to notice things you used to ignore, how your body tightens when someone raises their voice, how you apologize for things that are not your fault, how you stay silent when you have something to say, and instead of rejecting them like you always did, you start asking yourself, why? Why do I do this? Where does this pattern come from? What am I trying to protect myself from? These questions are not comfortable. They force you to look back, to revisit moments you'd rather forget. But it is in this willingness to look, to truly see what happened, that healing begins. Because minimization thrives on avoidance. It counts on you not to look too closely, not to sit too long with the truth of your own experience. It counts on you to keep going, to push through, to pretend. But when you stop, when you finally allow yourself to be still with your own pain, something remarkable happens. You realize that you can bear it, that feeling your emotions will not destroy you, that vulnerability is not weakness but strength. And slowly, very slowly, you begin to rebuild your relationship with yourself. You learn to listen instead of silencing yourself. You learn to trust yourself instead of doubting yourself. You learn to hold yourself with compassion instead of judgment. This process is not linear. There will be days when you fall back into old patterns, when you minimize automatically, when you tell yourself you're too sensitive. And that's okay. Healing is not a straight line. It's a spiral. You revisit the same wounds from different angles until they finally begin to close. What matters is that you keep coming back, that you keep choosing honesty over avoidance, that you keep reminding yourself that your pain matters, even when the world tells you otherwise. Because the world will keep telling you to minimize. It will keep rewarding stoicism and punishing vulnerability. It will continue to glorify those who never complain, who never ask for help, who can handle everything on their own. But now you know the truth. You know that this apparent strength often hides a deep wound. That behind every "I'm fine" there is sometimes an "I'm not okay, but I don't know how to say it." That forced independence is not autonomy, but isolation. And armed with this knowledge, you can start making different choices. You can start building a life where your pain has room to exist, where your needs matter, where your voice can be heard. This might mean setting boundaries with people who minimize your experience. It might mean seeking help, whether from a therapist, a support group, or a trusted friend. It might mean learning to say no, to ask for what you need, to take up space when you need it. These are not acts of weakness. They are acts of rebellion against a system that taught you to put yourself last. They are acts of self-love in a world that profits from your neglect of yourself. And yes, it will be uncomfortable. Yes, some people won't understand. Yes, you will feel guilty, selfish, demanding. Because that's what you were taught to feel when you put yourself first. But that guilt is not the truth. It's just the echo of old voices, old patterns, old beliefs that no longer serve you. And with time, with practice, with the gentle insistence that you deserve better, those voices fade. They are replaced by something softer, a voice that says you are enough, that your needs matter, that your pain deserves care, that you don't have to earn the right to be treated kindly. This voice has always been there. You just buried it under years of minimization, self-neglect, belief that you didn't deserve better. But it's still there, waiting for you to listen. So listen. Listen to that quiet voice that knows you deserve care, that knows your pain matters. That knows you are not too much, not too sensitive, not dramatic. You are simply human. And being human means feeling deeply, being hurt sometimes, needing connection and support. There is no shame in that. There is no weakness in admitting that life has been hard, that you carry wounds, that you need help to heal. There is only honesty, and honesty, as uncomfortable as it may be, is the only path to true healing. So be honest, with yourself first, then with others. Speak the truth about what you feel, what you need, what hurts you. Stop waiting for someone else to give you permission. Give yourself permission. Permission to feel, permission to heal, permission to take all the time you need, permission to be imperfect, to be a work in progress, to still be figuring things out. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to be healed to deserve care. You deserve care now, in the middle of the mess, in the middle of the pain, in the middle of not knowing how to move forward. And maybe that's the most important lesson of all, that you don't have to wait to be fixed to be worthy of love. You are worthy now, you always have been. Minimization just made you forget, but now you remember. You remember that your pain matters, that your needs matter, that you matter. And armed with this memory, you can begin to build a life that honors it. A life where you don't have to pretend to be okay when you're not. A life where you can ask for help without shame. A life where your vulnerability is welcomed, not rejected. A life where you are finally, fully, completely yourself. This life is possible. It begins with one courageous decision: to stop minimizing your pain and start honoring it. To stop abandoning yourself and start coming back. To stop pretending and start feeling. It is an act of rebellion. It is an act of love. It is the bravest thing you can do, and you are capable of it. You always have been. So start today. Start now. Start by sitting with yourself and asking, how do I really feel? And whatever the answer is, don't minimize it. Don't reject it. Don't compare it. Just hold it. Acknowledge it. Honor it. Because it is yours. Because it is real. Because it matters. And in this simple but profound act of self-recognition, you will begin to heal. Not by erasing the pain, but by finally giving it the space it has always deserved. By giving yourself the space you have always deserved. You deserve it. You always have deserved it, and it's time you finally believe it.